Hi, I'm Chanel. Large vehicles and motorhomes parked in residential areas has been a concern for a long time. I spoke to Infrastructure Minister Chris Thomas about what his department is doing about it.
Over the last few years, new primary legislation, that's a law, has come into force in the Isle of Man, which allows us to make regulations in the Department of Infrastructure for overnight and weekend waiting of certain vehicles. So in last autumn, we began the process of consulting with local authorities about where we should think about introducing such restrictions and also how we should do it, what sorts of vehicles, what sorts of places, because the law basically says that a person commits an offence if without reasonable excuse the person causes or permits a relevant vehicle to wait on a restricted road on a Saturday or Sunday or before 7 a.m. or after 6 p.m. on any other day. So we've got to define what is those certain vehicles, we've got to define what are restricted roads, we've got to define what is a relevant vehicle. Does it include motorhomes? Is it vehicles of more than that length, more than that height? Is it done by weight? And that's where we are. We're in the process of beginning to draft legislation on which we'll consult.
That process, did it start because of some of the concerns that residents had?
I think large vehicles overnight in residential areas has been a perennial issue. It's a specific example of the parking issue that afflicts Douglas and many other parts of the Isle of Man. So I can't say we invented the problem. It's just we're trying to come up with a solution, and that's always the hardest part.
And once this bill does go through, once it's discussed, will the DOI be working then with the local authority?
So that's what we started. So the Act is already there. The Act allows the DOI to make regulations. In October, November last year, we began the process of informally consulting with local authorities about their interests, and now we're going to be formalising that with actually putting together regulations that would specify where they would apply. So presumably it'll be on everywhere that's with a speed limit of less than 30 miles per hour or something, but that's still to be defined. What the length is, what the height is, whether we go about it in a different way, what we want to include, and also it'll then work out, and then also enforcement's always a very important issue, and I think the current intention is to look to a fixed penalty notice regime. So if you're in breach of it, you get a penalty like you would for a parking offence.
By when could we start hearing the progress of this?
Well, local authorities can now start telling us what their views are. In fact, I've also linked this in with bylaws for local authorities. So over this TT, there were a number of councillors, commissioners, who wrote to me about motorhomes. 5 of the local authorities actually have bylaws that deal with movable homes, I think they're called. So I've begun a process of research to look at whether local authorities could use their bylaws to this effect. But basically, to answer your question, I would imagine sometime next year we might have these regulations in force, and certainly we're now in the process of beginning to draft these regulations to specify which roads, what type of vehicles, what the regime would look like, and then we'd have to consult it, because there are always two sides. For everybody who doesn't want a large vehicle outside their home, there's somebody who needs to have that vehicle parked outside their home, so it's not going to be an easy fix.
I was just going to say, as you mentioned, it is a balancing act. What about those who, I'm not sure if it may be their company vehicle or if they have a vehicle as well as a motorhome, and then they now have to look at trying to park this motorhome somewhere else?
Yeah, so the law allows for exceptions and exemptions, and that's when it gets difficult. Obviously, everybody's got what they want, but as you quite rightly say, politics is about building a consensus and getting the balance inside the communities, and welcome the views of people who've been in touch with you from Pulrose, but also everybody else around the island, particularly the urban areas where roads are restricted.
So hopefully this is a step in the right direction to help all the residents.
Yeah, we have had regulations in the past. They weren't working, so those regulations have been repealed, and now we want to put in place regulations for certain vehicles in certain places at certain times with controls that are regulated, and we're looking for a balance in communities. We're not looking for vendettas between neighbours. We're looking for a balance about working out what works for everybody.
Will this bill have to go before Tynwald? Any idea when?
It will have to be approved by Tynwald, so with a fair wind and looking to put it before Tynwald at the beginning of next year for its introduction later next year.
Is there anything else you'd like to add or you'd like to say?
I just think it's quite interesting that bylaws are in place for this sort of thing in some of the local authorities, but not in all of them. So I'm looking forward to local authorities participating in the informal consultation I've just initiated, so we can learn more about their experience of using bylaws for this sort of thing, but also for other things covered in their bylaws, because that's perhaps a neglected part of the legal framework. Perhaps it's the case that you can do anything you want in the countryside, for instance, because they don't tend to have enforcement officers, whereas if you do the same thing in Douglas or Ramsey or somewhere, you're more likely to be committing an offence because it's been included in the bylaws.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.